Hello, welcome back. Happy New Year. I am your host, Anthony Mueller, the wine advocate reviewer for South Africa and Washington States. Today, I have a fantastic winemaker with me today. He'll be connecting momentarily, Christo Le Riche. So he is out of Stellenbosch, father and son team, making some amazing Cabernet. I see he's just connected. Let us bring him in the fold, shall we? Hope everyone's having a fantastic Wednesday. 2021 is off to a start, and it is here. So, hello, Christo. How you doing, sir?
Hi, Anthony. Glad to be here. Nice to chat to you this evening.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. So thank you so much for joining me. I know that it is late there in Stellenbosch where you are, a little after 11 p.m. So thank you so much for staying up today to chat with us. We have some amazing wines to try and some amazing topics to talk about. So for all the people who might not know who you are in the States and elsewhere, can you please give everyone a quick little background and bio about yourself and the Leriche Winery?
Yeah, so I'm basically the, at this stage, director and winemaker or cellar master. There's so many different words for those things. But basically, I've taken over the winemaking from my dad, and our wine business has been operating since 1997. Yeah, so we're a smaller producer. You can probably classify us into the boutique classification and we specialize in Stellenbosch Cabernets. So if you haven't heard about Stellenbosch Cabs before, we're definitely going to hear about that tonight. But yeah, so my dad was, he was winemaking. His career started in 1973 already. And he was one of the founders of the Cape Winemakers Guild. He's been South African Winemaker of the Year for the Platter Guide on 2 occasions already. He was a legend in the industry. And then in 97, he decided to go on his own, started our own business. And at that stage, he was known for cabs. So really being able to focus in on what was his passion. He figured, well, let me just really zone in on this varietal. So he decided to specialize in doing cabs in 3 different styles. And that's really what we do today. So we do a reserve Cabernet, what we'll probably call a standard Cabernet. That's the wine that we're chasing this evening. And then we do a Cabernet-based blend as well, which we call a Stellenbosch blend.
Fantastic. You also have a Chardonnay on your repertoire, yes?
Yeah, exactly. Not many people know about that. It's mainly only really coming off the winery. Smaller volumes, but it's something we love. I love drinking a good glass of Chardonnay as well. And we've got some spectacular vineyards to work with that are all sitting facing onto the ocean. So they've got these beautiful cooling breezes coming onto them. So it is for us also a passion to work with the Chardonnays of Stellenbosch.
For sure. Yeah, when you said your father was a legend, he's still around. He still is a legend.
He's very much still around. He's actually busy out fishing at the moment in Mossel Bay, and he's actually been very successful. So yeah, he's now into his 70s. He's moving towards retirement, although I don't think that'll happen really anytime soon. I'm trying to kick him out of the winery, but it's not working. But in the end of the day, with that kind of knowledge behind you, we work well together. He's a permanent mentor for me, and we work through and discuss everything we do. I mean, he's got over 45 vintages of experience. So in the wine trade, you just can't buy that kind of experience. And grapes takes a long time. We only get 1 opportunity a year to work with him. And yeah, we try our best on it. For
sure, yeah. Yeah, last year when I connected in Stellenbosch at your winery with your father, Etienne, and yourself, you both had a very different approach at looking at things, but yet your heart was still in the same place. And today we've got some amazing Cabernet to try, so we'll get into that a little later. But yeah, Stellenbosch Cabernet, I think shows so much potential, and we'll get into the kind of meat and potatoes of everything going on in Stellenbosch as far as Cabernet is concerned. But with that, how do you see Stellenbosch Cabernet making more of an impact in the world of wine moving forward?
there's for me kind of threefold directions you can probably go in this space. I think for one, we've got to consider what the style is of our wines and what we're working with. And in the world of Cabernets, it is a grape that has gone worldwide. It works well in a multiple of terroirs, and there's a whole lot of expressions of it. But to an extent, there's also been a homogenation, and everybody's pursuing the same kind of style of Cabernet, which is these big, robust, powerful wines. And I think there's of late has been almost a pushback to a lot more elegance and going back to the more elegant style of Cabernets. And I think that really plays into the hand of what Stellenbosch does really well. We've tried to go to the direction of these big, powerful wines. Our grapes just don't want to go there. We're sitting in this beautiful sweet spot between what you could probably call a Napa style and a Bordeaux style, where we've got the lovely acidities that you'll see in Bordeaux, but you've got the fruit and the ripeness that you'll find in a Napa wine. But it's uniquely Stellenbosch. The wines that we do is our own, and I think it adds a beautiful extra dimension into the world of Cabernets alongside the other great regions that you have in the world. And I think that's something where Stellenbosch hasn't really seen the recognition that I think we've deserved over time. That might be because of, historically, we've only really been in the wine market for the last 30 years. We weren't allowed to market, export, or sell our wines really pre-1990. And so ever since, we've really been a young entry into the market, and through the work of people like my dad, and then a variety of stalwarts in the industry, we've got this beautiful foundation to work off. But we've also got a newfound confidence. We know, now that we've traveled the world, we've worked in the world, a lot of the young winemakers and the people who are working in the wineries have seen what the greatest wines in the world are all about. We've come to realize that we're actually in that same bracket. And I think that's given us a newfound confidence to come forward with. And it's actually fun. It's added to that whole dynamic of South Africa. And South Africa has become a buzzword in the world of wine. And for good reason, is we've actually got a young group of winemakers moving in and people in the industry, and they're passionate and they've realized what we actually have. And that's given us a great confidence to work with.
That's awesome. Yeah, tasting through many of the Stellenbosch Cabernets, you begin to see this underlying tone of quality emerging, that that, like you said, it's not Bordeaux, but it's not Napa, and it's something that is uniquely South African. I'm glad we're having this chat today on Wednesday the 6th, because tomorrow, January 7th, I have an article about Stellenbosch Cabernet and the SCC, the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective, which you are founder and chair of currently, yes?
Yeah, co-founder and chair at the moment.
Yeah, and the vision of the SCC clearly overlaps many of the visions of the wineries that are producing like-minded, quality-driven Cabernet. With that, there is some homogenization of expression, but there is some individual uniqueness still within the wines that are inherent. Just, if you give 100 painters the same color and the same easel and the same canvas and the same paintbrushes, you're going to end up with 100 different paintings. But if you give everyone a lot more blue, you're probably going to end up with a lot more blue in the picture. And one of the great things that I've seen about Stellenbosch Cabernet as a whole is its unique identity to South Africa, to parlay that in the glass with its expression and be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the greatest Cabernets on the planet. Thinking back to what happened with the Swartland Revolution and the success they had in trying to bring together the awareness of what the region was doing, it almost seemed like the region was almost too big and they're focusing on too many varietals, where Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective and the like-minded Cabernet producers of Stellenbosch came together and they said, this is what we're doing. We see the focus, we see the precision, we see the acumen in the wine, in the quality. And I think once you start getting the message out about what you all are doing in Stellenbosch with Cabernet, I think it will start to change the game. I mean, I believe it already has. It's just the message needs to get out looking stylistically at, the Southern Hemisphere Cabernets, if you were to put Stellenbosch Cabernet up against, Australian Cabernet or Chilean Cabernet, you have some serious potential, or some serious, what am I looking for? You have a lot of competition, but price point, pound for pound, it's going to be hard to beat this. And I think once people start putting this in their glass, they're going to realize they're swinging for the fence. That's what's happening. They're swinging. They've pointed for the fence and they're swinging for the fence, and that's what's happening here. So with that, what are some of your favorite aspects of making Stellenbosch Cabernet?
I think we've got anybody who's actually traveled here and come to visit Stellenbosch will know the inherent natural beauty that we have within our town. We're sitting with the Atlantic Ocean to the south, so you've got these beautiful ocean breezes coming in, and then on the eastern side of the eastern side of our eastern boundary is mountains that are ranging over 3,000 feet. So we're going from sea level to 3,000 feet in the space of probably 5 to 6 miles. So it's this condensed and quite spectacular mountain slopes that we're working off, and they cause pockets and areas where you get more wind and less wind. There where you find less wind, it's warmer. There where you're sitting in the wind pockets, you're getting this lovely afternoon cooling breezes. You've got the valley effects. You've got the wind coming off the mountains itself, which is also cooling down some of the vineyards. So just working through Stellenbosch and with the different Cabernets, and I think that's something that's unique to us with Leriche, is that we do work with multiple sites throughout Stellenbosch, where we're trying to find different vineyards that express that region, or that what we call a ward, which is the kind of a ward in South Africa is the equivalent of Oakville or Rutherford or Stags Leap district, really within the greater Stellenbosch region. And just trying to find vineyards that are really expressing that ward to the very best of its extent. And if you can drive around the area and you're sitting on the Simmelsberg mountain slopes high up, and you're probably at about 1,000 feet above sea level, and you turn to the south and you look out over Stellenbosch and you look out onto the ocean in the south with Table Mountain on your right-hand side. I mean, there's few places in the world where you can do that. And then after work, you quickly hop into town, go for a surf, and it's just or go fishing. I mean, it's really just a spectacular place to work. And then on top of that, we've got the ability to make some spectacular Cabernet. So with working with these different pockets, I can really start to tune down into, right, what is the best expression of the tannin, the acidity, and the style of each of these regions. So you find your block, and you can really work in and hone in on each one of those different individual sites. So some of them we'll work with in open top fermenters, others go into oak fermenters, others go into concrete, shorter ferments or larger oak barrels. It's really this never-ending source of kind of intrigue and interest that you can find to the different sites. And I'm a nerd for Cabernet, and that's the stuff that really gets me going. It's just these individual little sites, and then just blending all of those things together in the end of the day. So I think that's those are two of the major factors. And then the last factor is something which I think is what wine is inherently all about, and that's the people. I've got a great group of friends obviously working here. We've got a lovely group of young winemakers coming through. We've got some older farmers. I mean, two of the farmers we're working with are some of the oldest farmers in Stellenbosch, and they in their late 70s and early 80s. My one neighbor is actually an ex-sheep farmer who's turned vineyard farmer in his retirement, and he's doing some of my very best grapes. So working with these different people and seeing how they farm their land, which is inherently, each guy has got a different style of farming as well, and how all of that comes together. There's many aspects to it, but I guess, yeah, that summarizes some of my favorite ways and reasons why I love this region.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's ever been to Stellenbosch or South Africa, in the Western Cape, just flying into Cape Town, you're struck with its natural beauty. It's just devastatingly beautiful, and you look around and all these striking rock faces that seemingly jet out of the ground, and you have this, it's almost otherworldly, where you can see the ocean, you can kind of smell the ocean sometimes with the breezes, and then you have like this stark, like, striking landscape that seems to just kind of jet out, and then you have these small microclimates because you have these, pockets of land formations that have been pushed out of the surface of the earth, and you have parts of Stellenbosch that see the orographic process where the clouds coming in are basically they hit the mountain and they're forced to either go up and over or go around, or rain on one side and slightly dry on the other. And you have these incredible pockets of microclimates that can make unique, expressive grapes that have its identity to where it's grown. And then you start to find these places and you make wine, and it's just, it's really, really tasty. And I think I've shown complete and utter restraint for too long. I've had this bottle open now for a half hour, letting it breathe, and we're about 16 minutes into the conversation. I think it's time to try some wine. So without further ado, we have the 2017 Leriche Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon to try. Christo, could you go ahead and introduce this wine and talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this is probably the backbone. Well, it is the backbone of what we do. It's the largest of our production. So how our winery really is structured and situated is that we work with the variety. Well, I've got about 14 different farmers that I work with, where I'm sourcing different blocks of Cabernets from. And then we'll bring each one of those blocks into the cellar. Our winery is really structured so that we can keep each one of those blocks separate for the first year, evaluate it, see what the vintage looks like. And then we blend up 3 different styles of Stellenbosch Cabernet. Firstly is our reserve, which is our flagship wine. And that is a wine which is for long-term aging, and really the very best of what we can do. But it's obviously got limited vineyards that are going to be going into that from a vintage to vintage point of view. Where with this Cabernet, what I really want to achieve here is be able to express Stellenbosch Cabernet in a bottle. So the idea really is that if you pick up one of these glasses, you should be able to say, that is quintessential Stellenbosch Cabernet. And if you put this next to our other great producers, and there's a lot to mention, I'm not going to go into that now, but actually you can read about them in the report, which comes out tomorrow. But if you put this wine down next to those, you should be able to see a seam of each of those producers and their estate wines showing out in this wine, and be able to say, oh, there's a little bit of the Simmonsberg's red fruit and tannin structure, and there's a little bit of the olive tapenade and garrique that you're getting off the Helderberg. And you've got that lovely cassis that you can get out of the Onkershoek Valley, and you've got that fruit purity and tannin seam that you can get off the lower slopes of the Helderberg. So really being able to kind of bring those vineyards together into a blend that is inherently just tasty Stellenbosch Cabernet. But then the other factor is it has to be soft and approachable. So when we produce these wines, we don't try and extract a huge amount of tannin into the wine. It's made with a softer, more approachable style so that you can drink these wines at 4, 5, 6 years old. But if you age them 10, 15 years, they're also going to give you the reward. So it's a nice, diverse wine. You can have it in a restaurant young. It really suits a variety of palates. And that's really the motivation behind what we're going for it. Then 17, absolutely amazing vintage. We're coming off the back of the 2015 vintage, which was really, really good. And it does seem that 17 is going to pip it. So it's been we've been blessed with, in the middle of an extreme drought, we've had 2 great vintages coming out through it. And I think this is probably my favorite cab that I have made since taking over the winemaking in 2010. And yeah, I'm very proud of it, and I really, really enjoy drinking it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so 9, 15, and 17 for Stellenbosch Cabernet vintages. Those are the ones that you want to look at and have in your cellar or enjoy.
Yeah, those are definitely the vintages that seem to be going for long-term aging. But one of the advantages that we do have is that we've got quite a we do have vintage variation, but there's also good consistency running through it. So if you are buying Stellenbosch Cabernets, they are, for example, 14 won't be as long aging, but it's got beautiful drinkability at a younger age. 2012 has also shown up really well with food purity. 11s But if you want to go general rule of thumb, 09, 15, 17, you can almost go to any producer within those ones that have made Stellenbosch cabs, and you're going to have fine grape wines available to you.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're exactly right when you say like you could taste excuse me, you can taste through a bunch of Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, and you begin to identify the intention and uniqueness of each individual producer, but there is that underlying something, that heart, that core, that is Stellenbosch Cabernet, where there are some producers in Stellenbosch that have a more generous approach, more opulent fruits, but the overall focus of Cabernet from Stellenbosch, I see, is more in that dark red fruit category. It's not that kind of juicy black fruit or even blue fruit. I find that the best examples tend to have that kind of darker red fruit that you'll typically find in Bordeaux. You know, it's not for the Napa Bordeaux or the Napa Cabernet drinker. They'll look at it and be like, yeah, it's not Napa for sure, but it's also not Bordeaux. And I think it straddles that middle line perfectly, and it will give those two drinkers something to enjoy because those aspects still end up in the glass. There's this mineral tension, this rockiness that I get with most Stellenbosch Cabernets, and yours included. You get that classic kind of pencil shaving, beautiful oak integration, a thoughtful tannic lift towards the end, and the epitome of Cabernet Sauvignon with that slight green aspect that is pyrazine, that slight hint of green bell pepper, which it's part of the genetics of Cabernet. And you typically find these expressions more with Bordeaux producers, but it's something that is incredibly food friendly. You see the overall package and you look at it and you say, this is incredibly food friendly. It's drinkable, it's age worthy, and it's delicious. And I think once more people start putting Stellenbosch Cabernet in their glass and become more familiar with it, I think that will be the moment where the SEC, I think, will be more impactful and start to achieve its goals of telling the world of what Stellenbosch Cabernet is all about. And I think you're doing it beautifully here with this wine. And I'm kind of bummed that I don't have the reserve with me today, because that is an absolutely stellar wine. But the 17 is still available in the States, yes, but the reserve is on order. If you want it, they have to go to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So the 17 reserve hasn't come into the US as yet, but that is the current vintage that we're on. So if anybody's interested in tasting those ones, then they can just contact us directly, and we can send that through directly with our importer.
Cool.
Otherwise, if you want to find these wines in the US, the easiest would just be to contact our importer directly, which is Blue Crane Imports. They're based out in Chicago. And then they've got a couple of guys who are based locally in Chicago who can then ship nationwide. And then they do distribute to probably about 10 states throughout the US. So then there is options into other directions as well. But yeah, if you're interested in the wines, just contact Jim Clark at Blue Crane Imports, and he'll be able to give you the quickest and best answer as to where to find the 17 cabs specifically.
Yeah. When I chatted with you and your father, Etienne, last year, we had an interesting conversation about Stellenbosch Cabernet from the 70s, when your father was working on some of them, about the amount of Cinsault blended into the Cabernet for Stellenbosch back in the 70s, and a little known fact that there was a fair amount of Cinsault blended into Cabernet in Stellenbosch Cabernet back in the 70s. Granted, the label laws were different back then. I think it had to be only 51% of what the label said. Do you have any intentions of doing like a throwback blend to how Stellenbosch Cabernet was made back in the 70s?
Yeah, well, we have actually started playing with that to a greater extent. So the Richesse, which is the third, as I mentioned earlier, the third wine that we do, which is a Cabernet-based blend, already contains about 18% of Cinsault. Now, for those of you who haven't tasted a Cinsault before, there's some beautiful examples out in Lodi. I know Tegan Pasa, I can never pronounce his name. Yeah. That one. He's made some beautiful examples as well.
Sure.
But it was a grape that was widely planted in South Africa, mass produced, and we've got some beautiful old vines of it. And the same reason we've got these beautiful old vines of Chenin Blanc in South Africa is the reason that we've got all these beautiful old vines of Cinsault.
Sure.
So what happened in Stellenbosch was actually that pre-1980, Cinsault was about 30% of the red plantings, the most planted red variety in the region. And then when the border varieties came in and Cabernet got a greater rise, the whole dynamic shifted. And we saw Cinsault dropping down to only 2% of the red plantings and Cabernet moving up into the leading varietal over the last 30 years and kind of taking its place where it needs to be. But what used to happen in the 50s and the 60s was that there was no label regulation. So they were able to kind of take Cabernet, which was extremely scarce and very expensive, and just extend it with some Cinsault. And you ended up with these beautiful, elegant wines. They also used it to soften the tannin structures, bring up some fruit into the wines. And at that stage, also, they struggled to ripen the Cabernets efficiently. And the Cinsault would ripen earlier, and it would just bring a little bit more alcohol into the wine. So instead of having to chaptalize, you could just add some Cinsault into the wine.
Sure.
And I've had some of those wines from the 50s, old Lanzeracs from 1957, 58, and the wines are absolutely mind-blowing. Sure. You will not find them anywhere else in the world, but you'll find them here in Stellenbosch. Maybe the Cape Fine and Rare auction as well, I know, is one of the sites where you can actually still track down some of these bottles. And they've been tasted against the top in the world by people like Jancis Robinson and those, and they have been rated on extremely high levels. Mm-hmm. And there's something about the Cinsault that just helps these wines to age. And my sister, actually, she works with us in the business. She's a Cape Wine Master. Did her thesis on Cabernet Cinsault blends and the potential of Cinsault as a South African variety. Now, some of you might know Chateau Moussard. They do Cabernet Cinsault Carignan, and that's a worldwide renowned wine that's absolutely spectacular. And it's a blend that is spectacularly beautiful. What the Cinsault brings is a lightness and an elegance to Cabernet, which is inherently big and powerful, making it a little bit more drinkable, but it changes the tannin structure, a little bit more grippy tannins. I can work a little bit with stems as well, something that you can't really play with that much with Cabernet. I can do some whole bunch ferments and on the Cinsault components. And it's just added this beautiful lightness and freshness into the other two cabs, which are inherently Cabernet and big and powerful. This Richesse just has this lovely elegance about it. So yeah, we've played around with the blend. And I've heard rumors of quite a few producers starting to go for it. I know Ernie Else has planted about 7 hectares of young Cinsault as well. They're using that to a much greater extent, and you'll see that in their Big Easy wines that there's quite widely distributed through the US as well. So there's definitely a new push towards it. We're seeing it in Stellenbosch and outside of Stellenbosch that people are playing with this blend. And I'm quite excited to see where it goes. I think it's something unique, something interesting, and it's something that South Africa has really got as part of our history, and that's why we started playing with it.
I concur, and I think you're on the right track as well. I haven't tasted back to the 50s with the Cab Cinsault blends, but I've tasted back to the early 70s, and you know, you try and you realize, you look at it, and you know that it's not Cabernet because it doesn't have the same color, but you try it and you realize that there's this really interesting mid palate that kind of dips down, and it kind of unfolds something that Cabernet doesn't do by itself. It's a rarity because there's no other really other place on the planet that's really doing those blends with as many producers that's happening in Stellenbosch. But yeah, I remember trying the Leriche and thinking like, this isn't 100% Cabernet. There's something else here, and kind of scratching my head saying, oh yeah, like, here we go. This is what it is. It's unpacking, unfolding, and then it adds some unique textures to the mid palate. But that's one of the great things about Stellenbosch Cabernet as a whole is even if you have 100% Cabernet from Stellenbosch, you get to see the intention and understand what's happening with like the minerality, the expression, and they're just quite delicious. So it pleases me that more producers in Stellenbosch are thinking about doing a throwback blend with the addition of Cinsault. It's great.
It's also, I think what I do enjoy about looking at the blending components of Cabernet in the region is that we do have this, as we've spoken about, diversity of terroirs. So we've got some sites which are producing some really outstanding Shiraz. We've got some sites with really good Chards. Cabernet Franc is popping up in some regions as well. The wines of Varietals should be known to you as well, quite well. And then you've got other producers who are doing Cabernet-based Bordeaux-style blends, where they're working with Cabernet, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec, similar to what Napa would do, or even going towards the Cabernet Shiraz components. So there's definitely this element where you can have these beautiful, pure 100% Cabernets. And then there's the alternative view where you can go to your more blended components of Cabernet. And that kind of encompasses the vast majority of reds that are coming out of Stellenbosch. And I think the Cinsault component gives a uniqueness and something that we can really hang our hat on and say, this is something that no one else in the world is busy doing. And I love the idea about it. Plus, my Cinsault vineyard is over 40 years old. So just walking into these lovely old bush vines, it's sitting right. It's one of the most southerly planted vineyards in Stellenbosch. It's just fun standing in the vineyard at the end of the day. And I think there's a lot of that where I love picking vineyards where if you walk into the vineyard, you just feel happy. It's like buying a house. You just know that you like the house and then you buy the house. Same with vineyards. There's just a sense where you walk into a place and you're like, yeah, this is a happy vine. They're gonna make some happy grapes and some happy wine at the end of the day. Obviously, there's a bit more science behind it as well, but that's the foundation behind, I think, most good blocks are found.
For sure. I had this thought last year with thinking about, the success of the Aussie, Cab Shiraz blend, and how South Africa could have the Cab Cinsault blend. Some of the best expressions of Cabernet from Australia I think, are not blended necessarily with Shiraz, but same can be said with Stellenbosch Cabernet, where they're fun blends where they kind of add something to the overall picture and they're almost synergistic, but there's something to be said about a pure expression of a wine coming from a specific vineyard. But that's the thing is, once you have a monoculture of one clone of Cabernet from one vineyard, it expresses sites. That's not to say it's going to be better than something that's been blended together, because now you're taking all the components and building up something. So I think there's so much potential in that regard for Stellenbosch Cabernet, just on the sense of having single vineyard Cabernets and also blending Cabernets together, and then all the different styles that exist. And pound for pound, there's no doubt in my mind that Stellenbosch Cabernet is equal to, if not better than, almost any other varietal or Cabernet region, shoulder to shoulder. I don't think you can really beat it. I mean, this is what, 35 here in the States? Is that correct?
Yeah, it should be coming in at about $35. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard pressed to find this level of quality in Napa for under $40. It's great. It's great. You're clearly killing it and making some fantastic Cabernet. So amongst your duties at Leriche, you're also one of the co-founding members of the SEC and the current chairman. In a few statements, tell us how the SEC, their goals and Leriche's goals essentially are in alignment.
I think when we originally started having discussions around creating a collective marketing body for specifically Cabernet from Stellenbosch. There was a lot of discussions just amongst the producers. We all said exactly the same thing: is we're sitting with this wine that we know is absolutely amazing, but just no one has actually just heard about it. And the moment you pour it in someone's glass, they love the wine, but somehow it's just not getting the traction on an international scale that we truly feel that it deserves and should be placed at. And we're getting more and more international. The big critics that are saying, yeah, we completely agree with you that these wines should be at the very best of and being expressed and sold in much more, or rather have much more awareness on a world scale. And we also realize that we have got an inherent lack of pure marketing drive, and just a simple story of actually being able to go out and say, listen, this is the styles of the different regions of Stellenbosch. This is what the Simmelsberg tastes like. This is what the Jonkershoek tastes like. And then bringing those producers that are specialists in those areas together to be able to bring their stories and just start to package what we do in a simple, coherent message that makes sense and that people can actually get a grip on it. Because South Africa is a complex place. They call us the Rainbow Nation. We're known for our diversity. And in that, if you look at us, I mean, people say South Africa is Pinotage. But South Africa is so much more than that. Yes, Pinotage is an important grape, and we do some beautiful examples of it, and it is our local grape. But it's not necessarily the flagship of all the regions that we are working with. So you've got Stellenbosch that has got Cabernet. There's Chenin and Shiraz coming out of the Swartland. You've got Pinot Noir and Chardonnay coming out of the Himmelenarde. You've got some Chardonnays and Rieslings coming out of Elgin. Robinson doing some amazing bubbles that Graham Beck is one of the big leaders, and you find that quite widely distributed in the US as well. Sure. So you've got this beautiful diversity of grapes and styles and people and messages, and that's inherently who we are. But through that, it becomes quite muddling. And in the end of the day, I think for somebody who's never been here, it really is hard to make sense. So what we said is, well, we just want to simplify the message. Stellenbosch and Cabernet go together. Everybody knows that. We just don't start telling the story. The Stellenbosch winery said, listen, we'll back you because we agree with what you're saying here. It is the most widely planted grape in Stellenbosch. And we do lead the South African category of Cabernet. There are beautiful examples outside of Stellenbosch as well. But Cabernet has found a home in Stellenbosch is the best way to describe it. And I think where Leriche and the SEC come together in that is exactly what we believe. That is exactly the way and the philosophy behind our making of wine, where we look at finding those different sites and then blending them into a wine that looks like a blend, but it's actually 100% Cabernets, and it expresses Stellenbosch and the Cabernets of our region, because we truly believe that there's these amazing wines, and we have found these amazing wines out there. So I think the story we want to tell and the story that Stellenbosch wants to tell is they just link together, and it was kind of a no-brainer for me when we started having these discussions to get involved and just put my efforts behind it, because it's something I am passionate about. So it's much easier to talk about and work with something you're passionate about than trying to do something that you don't really believe in the end of the day.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, thinking about France as a country and all of its, regions, with Burgundy and Pinot and Chardonnay and Champagne with, sparkling, and, Bordeaux with Merlot and Cabernet, and Loire with Chenin Blanc, Alsace with all of the wonderful white varietals there. It's hard for one country just to say, this is the one grape we're going to hang our hat on, where it makes sense for a region to say, this is what we're all about, and then move forth together as a region and have its producers kind of marching to the same tune and telling the world what it's all about. And it's unfortunate that the world had the year that we did last year, because I know that a lot of people had a lot of high hopes and goals for connecting with things, and I know that the Stellenbosch Cabernet producers would have been able to get out and start telling their stories, but the entire world went into lockdown, and then you guys in South Africa, I mean, you guys suffered not one but two prohibitions, and a complete lockdown of your ports, which stopped all global exports of your wine, and quickly that overturned. But moving forward,
Yeah, we actually
good.
we're in our third wine lockdown at the moment. So we've just been closed down over the entire New Year's up until the 15th of January. There is no liquor to be transported or basically distributed to restaurants, wholesale. You can't even have a beer and pop it in your car and go off to the beach so you can have one after a surf. Yeah. If they find you, they're going to be locking you up. So it's unfortunately necessary, but it is weird and trying times, and we're trying to make the best of it, and just kind of figure out how to navigate this time.
For sure. So what are some of your hopes for 2021 post-COVID, post-lockdown for Leriche?
2021. Let's talk about 2022 because we haven't kicked this one off on a very good, very good note so far. I think really for us, firstly on a vineyard point of view, we've really been working towards just having farmers starting to plant specific blocks for us. So we've through the last period of time worked with blocks which usually started around 8 years old, and then we're now working to blocks that are around up to 30 years old as well. And we've been working with those blocks for long periods of time. But it's almost with that second generation where I'm starting to take over from my dad. We've got these blocks that we've been working with for many years, and they're coming to the end of their lifespan, so we're going to have to start replanting. So that's something that I'm finding really exciting, is working with a replanting of the site where you're trying to match the quality that you were getting before that, or even fine-tune it so that you can get something that's even better and even more expressive. That's something that the Burgundians have been doing for over 800 years. The Bordelais have been doing that since the 1840s, and it's something that is very important in the development of a block and of vineyards. So that's something we're putting a lot of our focus and our energy and time in. And I think that's one of our major kind of focal goals in what we're doing. And then, the rest is just getting the wines out there, telling our story, and just getting the wine in people's glasses. They can just taste it and enjoy it.
For sure.
So that's really the focal points. I mean, other than that, we're in the wine industry, so it's the beauty is in the fact that everything stays the same, and you just make these small little tweaks as you're going along with it. But underneath, when it comes to the vineyards, that's really where we're doing most of our focal work at the moment.
For sure. So where do you see Leriche in 20 years?
Oh, good question. My sister and I were having a very, very good discussion and debate about that yesterday as well. For me, really, it's just about getting and fine-tuning what we're doing. For me, in 20 years' time, I want to see our Cabernet and our Reserve really standing up and having that understanding of what Stellenbosch is and what Stellenbosch can offer. Working with those portfolio of vineyards that can showcase what we want to be able to offer, and then having the platform to be able to showcase these wines to the world, so that they're not just consumed in South Africa, which was at the moment is up to 70% of our distribution is only local. And if you want to find our wines that are coming from the early 2000s and the late 90s, you're only going to find them on auction in South Africa. So it's really, for us, important to be able to get these wines into the US, get them into the European markets, into the Asian markets, and just being able to give people access to be able to taste what Stellenbosch is and what we do and the wines that we're doing. So I don't really see us changing what we're doing at the moment, introducing new wines, going in a different direction. We're still going to be doing Cabernet, and we're still going to be doing the 3 same wines that we're doing now in the next 20 years' time. We've got absolutely no idea or desire to change that because we love what we're doing. But within that bracket of Cabernet, there's so much more to figure out and work on, and I think that's really going to be our focus.
Cool. So you also do make the Chardonnay, and it's very small production. You're also talking about having a 40-year-old Senso vineyard. Are there any other varietals that you would like to play with over your career?
Yeah, definitely. So my very first vintage was actually, well, outside of my dad's winery, was for Bouchard Finlayson in the Yilmah and Arder Valley to make some Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays. I've always loved Pinot, and I find Pinot really the sister of Cabernet when it comes to producing. And a lot of guys have looked at me very funny when I said this, but I find there's a lot that you can learn about making good Cabernet, about working with Pinots. Cabernet can be very forgiving and kind of hide the mistakes that you've made, where Pinot is completely unforgiving, and you'll never find it. If you make a mistake, it shows it to you immediately.
You're
and you can really hone your skill with Pinot, and finding those details. And if you extrapolate that back onto Cabernets again, you can start to fine tune those real details in the Cabernet, which often can be hid through tannin and fruits, and just Cabernet is this big, bold wine. But if you want to get the nuance in it, you've got to have that detail understanding. So, yeah, I love Pinots as well. So that's one of the directions I would like to work with. But then on the flip side, I'm really loving what's coming out of South Africa from a Chenin point of view. The old vineyards the guys are working with is beautiful.
Sure.
Which is also why I'm working with Chardonnay. And I think Chardonnay and Chenin Blanc are for me, out of a white wine, my favorite whites that I'm drinking at the moment. And what I love about them is that they both have the ability to express sight in such a great way. If you really have a great sight on Chardonnay and Chenin, they can really stand alone as single vineyard offerings. But with that, there's a lot of space for the winemaker's interpretation as to how he wants to showcase this vineyard. Whether you're going a little bit riper, whether you're going a little bit more like Germanic and fresh and clean, or if you're going rather to the more alternative side of it or the more natural side of it, where you start going spontaneous fermentation, skin contact, orange wine. There's so much choice and diversity. Yeah, and for us, I mean, there's this plethora of stuff that you can work with. And Chenins have got this ability where you can find this vineyard and just figuring out what is the best way to express this vineyard. That is what I love. So I'm not someone who subscribes to any singular specific school of thought when it comes to the production of wine. For me, it's about what works best on this specific site. And if that means that we're going to a full-on natural production methodology with biodynamic, then I think that is definitely the direction to go. And then there's other sites that just express themselves better. If you just use inoculated yeast, cool down the tanks, make this ice-cold, crisp Sauvignon Blanc, the wines are delicious. So I think there's this lovely diversity you can find, and working with Chenins and Chardonnays, there's space to play in that direction, which I find intriguing. So maybe we'll work with that in the future.
Cool, awesome, yeah. I mean, but don't let it impact any of this Cabernet, because it's delicious.
No, that won't be. You won't see that under Leriche. That's for sure. That's actually my private little cellar. You'll have to come and visit me on the farm if you want to see the other stuff that I'm busy playing with as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I was thinking about the terroir and the climate of Stellenbosch. I suppose you have to find the perfect right microclimate for Pinot if you want to grow Pinot in Stellenbosch really, really well, because it's so fickle and
yeah. I think there's about 2 or 3 guys that are actually doing Pinots. It's tricky to find. There's one site that's actually doing some really good stuff. Mick Craven is working with a vineyard at the moment, which is right in the south of Stellenbosch. But in the end of the day, heading out further south towards Hermanus and Elgin region, that's where Pinot really starts to shine out of the South African context. And I think that's where we're starting to see the really good ones coming out as well.
For sure, yeah. Those cooler coastal influences that give Pinot Noir exactly what it wants to be happy, because it's a tricky grape to get right. And well, that's the thing, is when you have Cabernet that's good, you just stick with it and just do that. But that's the thing is, thinking about all the Italians in Barolo, growing Nebbiolo, after a while you say, you know what, maybe I want a white wine. Maybe I just want to drink some Riesling, and I wouldn't have Nebbiolo planted everywhere. But yeah, awesome. Well, I know it's getting late there, and I know it's almost midnight your time, so thank you so much for staying up and talking with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, Do you have any last thoughts or parting words for us today? Maybe a reflection on 2020, or something that's been on your mind, or something you want to say?
I think my biggest thing is that South Africa's been over a long period of time, and I know, especially in the US, there was this mentality that South Africa is Pinotage, and the Pinotages that we put out there was not nice. So I've had a bad South African Pinotage once, and I do not drink South African wine for that reason. And then you ask the question, how long ago was that? And the answer was, no, this was 30 years ago.
Way back today, right? Yeah.
And you've got to say, well, Pinotage is tasting a hell of a lot better since, and there's some amazing examples that are coming out that are aging absolutely beautifully. And then South Africa is not what we were 30 years ago. We are changing. It's so much dynamic, new winemakers, and the old guys are being pushed as well. So you're seeing the old guard changing it up. The new guys are pushing the old guys, and it's this beautiful dynamic in the industry at the moment. And I think being able to be part of that and being part of this movement of South African wine, but being focused in on Stellenbosch Cab specifically is for me so exciting. It's so much fun, and there's this energy that's going through the country. And we're seeing that locally as well, where guys who in the past would be drinking Sauvignon Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc only, now suddenly know what a skin fermented Grenache Blanc is. And you ask, like, how on earth did you find that out? But it's because of the good work the guys are starting to do, and you're seeing these new things coming through. But I think the biggest thing is that if you have a mindset around South African wines and this preconceived idea, open up, think a little bit wider, and go and try the new stuff that's coming out there. But also not, especially with Stellenbosch Cabernets, don't just open a bottle and because it's coming in at $35, you're just going to quickly drink it down on a Thursday evening. Give it some time, give it the cellaring, give it the decanting it needs and the respect it needs. And I think you will be extremely surprised with where these wines are and the quality that's sitting there. And then if you're drinking them at 10 to 20 years old, that's when these wines are, for me, really, really singing, and where I love drinking them. So, yeah, I would say just put a chance out there, taste these wines, and join the rest of us that are busy loving these wines and drinking them, because they're unique and they are what they are. And they offer a new taste and a new profile, and that's all that wine is all about. It's about discovery and enjoying it and tasting new things.
I completely agree. I think it's slightly a sad fact that, America only consumes about slightly over 5% of the overall production of South African wines. And we are a major consumer of the world of wine. And I think if and when America begins taking more chances and voting with their dollars, and they pick up and they purchase a bottle like this, they'll begin to see the purity, the precision, the finesse, and the quality that's happening in South Africa. And I do believe that in our lifetime, probably 10 to 15 years, that we will see America begin to double its consumption of South African wines, just by simply looking at it, spending the bucks, trying it, and saying, yeah, solid. Where else can I find this quality for this price point? I also believe that South African wine is going to end up getting slightly more expensive. I think as it should. Yeah, you got to pay the farmers, you got to pay the growers. People need to eat. But pound for pound, put it in your glass, drink it. America's missing out. You got to check this out. Awesome. Cool. So I thank you so much again. I know it's late. It's almost midnight, so I'll let you go to bed. Thank you again, Christo, for chatting with me today. It's been an honor and pleasure. I hope you have a fantastic 2021. And
thank you.
Until then, stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others.
Will do.
Cheers.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, really appreciate it. It was great to be here. And yeah, all of the best. And looking forward to seeing your notes on the Stellenbosch cabs that are coming out tomorrow.
For sure. Have a lekker day.
Okay. Thanks. Go well.
Cheers.